Throughout this video series, we've tried to communicate several key concepts to you. One is the principle that one of the differences between high school and college is the role of active learning. Active learning means that you take on the responsibility of engaging with ideas and facts yourself, rather than merely memorizing what your teacher says. In his book Permanence and Change, philosopher Kenneth Burke wrote that thinking which does not include thinking about thinking is merely problem solving, an activity carried out very well by fish. University students hear a lot of talk about the importance of thinking, but you may not hear much about how we think or what types of thinking we do. So in this episode we're going to remedy that by talking about thinking about thinking. U.S. educator Benjamin Bloom is famous for his research on the taxonomy of thought, which attempts to categorize levels of human thinking into 6 levels of cognitive reasoning. Let's use it to think about apples. Knowledge is the first level. Someone thinking at a knowledge level might ask, what are the health benefits of eating apples? This information is purely factual answers. The second level is comprehension. As an example, you might compare the benefits of eating apples to eating oranges. This is moving beyond the level of simply knowing things to being able to understand them. The next level, level 3, is application. What kinds of apples are best for baking a pie? Here, again, you're moving from knowing things and understanding them to using them. The fourth level is analysis. Describe 4 ways of baking pies. Here we're taking parts of information apart, putting them back together, trying to understand how facts work together in sequence or how they relate to each other otherwise. The 5th level is evaluation. Do you feel that serving apple pie as a snack is healthy for children? Here we are judging information and evaluating or measuring it. The 6th level, and the most difficult and abstract level, is synthesis. For example, convert an unhealthy apple pie recipe to a healthy one. These levels are not simply different, they all build on each other hierarchically. In other words, synthesis is not only different from analysis, it is also more difficult and displays a higher level of reasoning. A fish can think at a knowledge level and might remember that an owner opening a box of fish flakes above the tank means dinner. My daughter's cat comprehends that the sun goes down, and that means she will be fed soon. She is displaying the 2nd level of thinking. At the 3rd level, application, your dog might be able to think of a simple game to play with a ball or a frisbee. After these 3 levels, the animals get left behind quickly, and we're in the world of human thought. Notice something else, that this table also matches fairly closely what some of your classes at KAC are doing. Your academic writing class matches some of these processes. In moving from writing activities based on comparing things, to analyzing and evaluating things, up to creating new information based on prior information. Reading class also involves the basic skills of knowing what words mean, analyzing what the arguments of the text are, and then evaluating and judging texts, and finally creating new information from different texts. These levels of thinking definitely inform what you do in the classroom.
Let's talk about synthesis and how you can use this in your academic writing. You may wonder what synthesis really is. Well, we can look at the definition first, and then we're going to take a look at what we mean when we say you need to use this skill when you're writing things in your academic writing class or when you're preparing materials for a presentation, and so on. It's something you already do to some extent now, but of course, we would like to make you be more careful about it and more concentrated in your effort as you use this skill, this process, this tool in future work that you do here at KAC. Synthesis really means the combination of ideas to form a theory or system. Well, let's look at a different definition that might be more fruitful. Someone once said that synthesis means, at least in a practical sense, understanding the meaning of several things, such as articles or books, chapters of books, pamphlets, interviews, whatever. Understanding the meaning of these things and finding some common thread that goes through all of these materials that I have encountered. Here's an example of synthesis from everyday life. When you came to KAC at first, and you got to know some of your students who had already been there for a year or two, you probably talked about various things, such as, what life is like here at KAC, maybe some of the classes you have, stuff like that, right? At some point, someone probably gave you some tips on the professors here. And then, of course, you may have met that professor. Perhaps you have them in class, and you get to see firsthand how they are to you, classmates. They may, through their questions or other things that they do, reveal to you different qualities about that professor which you haven't noticed yourself. This information tells you what that professor is like. Let's look at a different kind of synthesis. Synthesis in a general way that you might do in your academic life, especially if you're doing writing or preparation for some of your content courses. You have to pull together information from things you read, from research you do online, perhaps even from research you do firsthand, and then you have to put that information together to make logical conclusions or helpful new ideas that you then use when you write up a report. Of course, as you've already learned, you should be using citation. Ultimately, one of the goals of doing the synthesis, one of the reasons, for example, that your professors ask you to bring in a reference list that has 10 or more items, or when they ask you, okay, you need to read this in addition to your textbook, is that they want you to use critical thinking. They want you to expose yourself to various ideas, and some of the ideas may intentionally be conflicting ideas. Your professor wants you to be able to evaluate these different ideas, to ultimately find a way to put them together into something reasonable enough. You have to be able to say, well, this one and this one disagree. However, their disagreement is based on this other idea, which is not really relevant anyway, or whatever the case may be. Okay, a few tips on how to do this process. This is one way you might go about doing it. Let's say you've read a particular thing, such as a news article. Hopefully you were using SQ3R. Even better, you may have been skimming it to find main ideas and then scanning it for any details that you needed. Now that you've finished, pause for a moment. Don't bother looking back at the original reading, and make a few notes on the main idea. Jot down some themes. Try to generalize if you can. Repeat that process for any other text that you really like. For each separate text, make a few notes, brief notes, on what the main idea is, and try to rely as much as you can on your own writing and not simply on copying a sentence or two from what you've read. That is, use your skills of paraphrasing here. How can I connect them? You may have to connect them in a more abstract way. You may not be able to say, well, clearly these two are reinforcing each other. It may be much more difficult at first to see what the connection is. Looking at it in a different way, you may give yourself a little checklist and say, okay, with each new reading, try to do these things. Be self-aware. Be aware of what you know about that topic, and be aware of what, any biases or other things you might have, because that can also become a part of your writing, and that's not always bad. I mean, part of synthesis is also including your own personal perspective on the materials. Anytime you read or reread or review, do it in an efficient and effective way. Of course, ask questions. Ask questions to yourself. Ask questions to someone else. Question the ideas that the author is presenting. Try to compare the material that you're reading, perhaps contrast them, perhaps connect them to different things, concept which your professor has presented in class. Be flexible, be creative, be open-minded. I will show you what might happen if you were to read various texts and try to put them together and draw some new conclusions. Let's imagine that you are writing a report on transportation. This example could work equally well for marketing or from a social and political science aspect. So, regardless of your major, this example of synthesis should be useful. Okay, so let's say you found a few articles, and the first one, you were able to understand from this first reading that the airport rail link in country is running over its budget, it's losing passengers, and the whole system is in need of an overhaul. Changes need to be made. Perhaps more infrastructure, perhaps changing prices or funding, or the system is simply not going to work. Okay, you've come to your next article and you discovered from reading that the main idea is the airport rail link in country B is a smashing success. It's great, absolutely wonderful. It fits well with existing infrastructure in that country, such as other transportation systems. People like it, government likes it, employees working there like it. It's great. You've come now to reading 3. This country, country C, has a haphazard system. Public transportation is not well integrated. There are no airport rail links in most cities. Only 2 or 3 really exist, but most of the people in the country have to drive themselves or have a friend drop them off at the airport when they go somewhere. We've come to the big event. How would we put all of this together? It's clear that airport rail links around the world have had varying success. That simple idea is one way that we can connect them all. We can, of course, add detail. We could say, in countries where public transportation is already well developed and well used and popular, adding an airport rail link is a logical idea and it works very well. In countries where public transportation is still in development, airport rail links must be carefully planned and deployed, or they run the risk of costing a lot of money and being ineffective. And in countries where public transportation is not well established at all or virtually non-existent, adding an airport rail link is an illogical step. There could be other ways that someone might synthesize this. Of course, it depends on the main idea of your particular report. Regardless, it is possible to synthesize these readings, and this was a relatively simple example because they were all directly related to airport rail links. You would need to use more than 3 readings. I simply did 3 for the example because we don't have all day. A few final notes I'd like to give you on synthesis. I'm simply saying when you're asked to read material and incorporate the material into your writing, you should try to do these things. Show, through your writing, show the connections. Don't say, well, this article in the New York Times is related to that article in the Korea Herald because both of them talk about airport rail links. First of all, that's a very unacademic way of presenting the information, and second of all, it's not very helpful. As I showed in my example, you say, oh, airport rail links in different countries have different success depending on the level of development of existing public transportation. Demonstrate your own knowledge of these texts and your ability to analyze them and understand them and, think well enough to find useful, effective connections. You also need to do some interpretation. Don't simply report. Add in your critical thinking. Add in your own informed perspective. Your essay is not simply comprised of what you've read. It also has to include your ideas. Otherwise, you're doing a summary and you're not doing writing. Another person might have chosen a different perspective or a different conclusion that they would draw from those readings, and that's okay. Whatever you decide to focus on, you will need to demonstrate why it is relevant by showing these connections and demonstrating that you have understood what you read and clearly explaining that connection and its importance. When you're doing synthesis, though, as I've said several times, there's no need to do some things that I'm going to show you now, because doing these things are not academic, not professional, and don't demonstrate careful and educated and helpful thought. Your job is not to summarize in great detail and then try to draw a connection. You don't want to say, oh, X and Y are related because they're in front of Z. It's not professional, it's not academic, it doesn't help anybody. You want to simply show the connections. State what the connection is. Airport rail links are blah, blah, blah. And then explain it. Synthesizing, that is, pulling together information and data and whatever that may not seem very closely related, is an art. It's something that requires a little bit of skill, a little bit of creativity, like art does. And it's something that you will not necessarily feel comfortable with when you first do it. You may feel overwhelmed, or you may feel like there is no connection. But with practice, you will be very successful.
We're going to leave you with an example of oral synthesis. Here's a short video where musicians take unrelated music and sounds and combine them intelligently to create something new. It's some of the highest level reasoning humans do, and it's definitely above the level of fish. Watch the video, and when people tell you about the importance of thinking, or about thinking for yourself, realize that this advice depends not only on the quantity or quality of your thinking, but on what level. Thinking smart is a part of working smart.
Well, what can I do?
You could play that 16th note groove
just straight.
going. You'll be amazed.
Okay. Do it again. All right.
We need more than one guitar part. There'll
Okay.
be somebody playing single notes, somebody playing chords, and they'll mix them together.
Okay. And let's just pick the mother of all funk chords. Let's pick a ninth chord.